Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Goodstein, and welcome to the Digital Leaders Show. This week, we're discussing monopolies versus conglomerates, how AI may transform medical research, Twitter's quest for free speech, and other headlines from our DEI Weekly. It's a curated selection of our favorite content for global digital leaders, and it goes out each week to members. You can sign up at DEInetwork.com. We're live each Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, 6 Central European Time on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And the audio recording is available on major podcast platforms. Our goal each week is to discuss key issues and news at the intersection of business, technology, and the humanities in hopes of making you a better digital leader as we all transform the digital society and digital enterprises. I head up the Digital Enterprise Institute and the Institute for RPA and AI. We're a professional association and peer-to-peer research network providing research, education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members across the globe, all around automation, AI, and digital transformation. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga. He's our Chief Research Officer and author, educator at the University of Maryland and Georgetown University. Carlos, good afternoon.
And good afternoon.
So for those of you watching for your first time, please check us out. We have our weekly newsletter that goes out each week, as I mentioned. You can check that out, as well as some of the other things that we do as an organization at DEInetwork.com. And our research site is live as well now at DEIresearch.com. And some of the topics that we talk about each week, come from that. So you can kind of follow along or check it out after the show. But Carlos, couple topics that are top of mind this week. We talked a lot about FTX last week, so I won't belabor that. Still details emerging in that whole thing, but Twitter is still in the news. I was gonna say in the news again, but it really never stops being in the news, right? And there was an interesting podcast that came out from Wharton Business School this week, where they were really talking about the free speech angle of this whole thing. We've talked a lot about free speech and content moderation and things, in general. What do you think about the recent Twitter developments this week?
Well, it's interesting that you see the headlines already about sort of partisan divide, right? It wasn't going to take very long. In fact, it took less than a week for the sides to sort of split up, right? Read Twitter with one side happy that Musk is back, and then the other side saying that, look, the team has been cut to the point where you're going to have to see a kind of devolution of speech back to kind of what it was a couple of years ago. So I think it's always one of those things where what is Twitter really, what role does it play, right, becomes the issue. And I think it's going to be, what's clear is that it's going to be very hard to sort of find that balance, as always with this platform. It's just this question of where do you draw the line and censoring or curtailing someone's speech, right? We like to think that certainly if you're harming or inciting harm, but before that, it's a really gray area, and it's going to be a real challenge for this new team running this platform.
Yeah, and there's this issue of making it available to everybody, and so you've seen a bunch of these accounts that were shut down under the previous regime now are being brought back. Obviously, the big story, one of the big stories was Trump being put back on, but others as well. But there's a couple different perspectives here. One of which I think we talked about a few weeks back, which is if you want to have free speech, one of the ways that you can validate credibility from versus just the junk that is inevitable in any of these platforms, I think, is by verifying that the source of the information is valid. This issue, I think I said it last time we spoke, this idea of having to pay for a blue check, to me is still a big mistake.
Well, it didn't last very long, right? It was reversed. I think they rolled it out for 2 or 3 days, and then they decided that it was just wasn't working. So it was pulled, like I said, within the week. The blue check thing was kind of gone. So they're now back to this thing, which is like a gray check for certain accounts, right? I think certain prominent accounts, but for the most part, we're right back to what it was sort of before the blue thing with the same issue, is that it didn't really work.
Yeah, and the other challenge, which I think you mentioned as well, is kind of I think a paradigm challenge, is that this is an advertising driven model, right? And so does the circus that has become Twitter, is it good for an advertiser, right? You see, a bunch of big brands this week pulled their advertising, right? Audi, General Mills, GM, Pfizer, United Airlines, others. They're saying, hey, there's just a lot of chaos. Some of them are citing a spike in hate speech and misinformation over the last several weeks. There's one research group cited in this Wharton piece that there's a 500% surge in use of the N-word in just a 12-hour period sometime this week. So, if you're an advertiser, especially as these companies more and more, as we've also talked about in the show, are becoming personified. These brands seem to have an identity, a social mission. They got to be more and more careful who they're associated with, right?
It's a tricky thing. It's been a problem before on things like YouTube, right? And even on Google search, where people didn't want to have their banner appear next to something offensive. On Twitter, there is a roulette wheel, right? You don't know apparently where it's going to appear. So the brands of what I read was they're saying, look, we're going to have to sit it out for a while. You guys sort out whatever you have to sort out, and once you can reassure us that our ad is going to appear along some terrible statement or terrible content in their view, then we're just going to stay on the sidelines. Brands, as we know, right, again, are notoriously conservative. They don't like taking these chances, and they don't need the aggravation, especially when you're paying for that aggravation, right? So no, what's the reason? Honestly, it doesn't make any sense to you, right? They're going to have to sort out this problem, the business model, right, the regulatory model, the content model, I think, before people sort of come back in a major way into the platform. And meanwhile, they have, of course, all their HR issues, right, internally within the team. So, okay, it's Musk, right? The guy is Musk, so he's going to have to go through some period where it looks like chaos, probably from the outside. And if he's successful, he'll come out on the other side of that, and you'll have, a plan. They went through it with Tesla, right? When Tesla went through its dark period of that terrible year he talked about, where they were sleeping under the desk, whatever it was, and the company came out of it successful. We'll see if the history repeats itself with Twitter.
Yeah,
I don't think so. My opinion. I don't have the confidence that he will, because it's a very different animal.
Yeah.
But look, he's the one with all the zeros, right? His bank account.
Yeah, I haven't given up on Elon, but I will say I feel as if, and I spent a lot more time on Twitter in the last few weeks than I have probably in the last few years, which maybe is indicative of something where you say, hey, the advertisers, maybe they come back. There's a circus right now, and there's some stuff that's got to be worked out, and it's kind of the wild, wild west. But at the end of the day, let's face it. I think you were the first to say this. Like, why do these companies even have ethics, right? They're companies, right? And their job is to make money, right? So, at some point, if the eyeballs are there, then the circus kind of, slows down a little bit. Maybe they come back, but I do think, it's gone over a line in the last few weeks. He didn't get me when he was carrying the kitchen sink in. He didn't get me when he, slashed a bunch of jobs. I think he was trying to initially show that there's a lot of waste here and we're not going to put up with it. But the stuff over the last few weeks, it's gone from as we've debated, debatable issues to almost like, not bullying is the wrong word, but it's almost just become a game. Like you even see his tweets, and it's, he's just trolling people. He's doing all the things that I think are bad about the platform. He's doing it to politicians and to people that are disagreeing with him. To me, why, if you want to create a little bit of a media circus, fine, create it, but don't start fights with all of your potential customers in the process.
Look, maybe that's the reason why he bought it at the end of the day. He's rich enough to spend $54 billion for a toy. And in some way, I think this is part of what this was from the very beginning, right? It was this, he just wants this platform. and he'll do with it whatever he wants. He doesn't really. I don't think he really cares what anybody else thinks. Or if 54 billion goes away, he's still one of the richest people on the planet. Right? So he can. I mean, it's amazing to say, right, that he can afford to have this thing fail, and oh well, he'll move on to the next thing. It's
Yeah, I hope it doesn't though, because you're right. He can, but my feeling about him, at least prior to this, was that and I think I've even said publicly that I think he proves my point of why a lot of companies should go back to private, right? That they don't have to answer to shareholders, and that they want to ultimately achieve things that they won't be able to achieve if they're looking at quarterly earnings and stuff. So I hope he succeeds. I still think he's gonna. I still think where the real money is packaging this audience, packaging other services alongside the advertising model, so that this audience can partake in. But
and I read it in my book, is that all the platforms have this, I call it, dominant media logic, right? That my term that scholars use, and it is the thing that drives audience or engagement. And on Twitter, the dominant media logic is a fight. I mean, it was built for this, right? So, and to have a heavyweight like him buy it, to me, I think you're going to wind up sooner or later, right? Just reinforcing that as the dominant logic, which means that Twitter exists for people to argue on, and to have disparate opinions. So the question is, when that is the basic unit of structure, like the atomic unit of the platform is debate, quote unquote, on a good day and flame wars on a bad day, then how do you make money off of that? Right. That's really what it is. It's MMA, right? It's boxing with words. So where's the promoter, right? That's really what it's going to be. Maybe that's really ultimately what he wants, right? He wants big debates between big people with big names, and that will attract an audience, right? You might think of it as really, it's just mixed martial arts with words. And if you can build a platform where you pay, right, pay-per-view, this week this person's going to fight this person, right, left versus right, pro this versus anti that, and you monetize that, then maybe there's somewhere in the back of his head some crazy model that suddenly makes sense. Right now, it's just people who don't really matter too much to the platform that are fighting each other. And you see that one way to build a name on Twitter is to pick a fight with somebody well known, have them respond if you're lucky enough, right? And then that builds authority to you. So it's a really interesting platform in the way it works. It's not like YouTube, or it's not Instagram, TikTok. It is a platform for, like I said, debate on a good day, right? Insults and hate on a bad day. But what it's for.
But I do think there is some light at the end of the tunnel. So there's some light at the end of the tunnel, in the sense that there are some interesting things that at least I've seen myself that seem to be new. Some threading, if you will, of context of, okay, this tweet happened because this person said this and that person said that. Although I've heard that they may or may not be getting rid of that. There's also some talk about kind of creating kind of subgroups or interest areas within the platform, so that you kind of see what you want to see.
Yeah, well, it's more like Discord in that sense, right? Because you control on Discord, right, the groups that you belong to, who you see and who you don't see. I think the nice thing about Twitter is when you discover something, right? You discover an account that actually has interesting things to say, or somebody who has insightful views, and then you can get that directly from them, sort of unfiltered. To me personally, that's Twitter at its best. You can hear almost somebody thinking, right, about things as they kind of happen. That's why I think it works so well with sports. When people are live tweeting a game, it's sharing the experience of watching a Super Bowl, right, or NBA final with this community that includes stars, regular people, right, professional athletes, whatever. That to me is Twitter at its best. It's just that ability to interact with people that you normally wouldn't interact with as you watch the Super Bowl or a political debate.
Yeah.
Right. So there's great things about the platform. I really like Twitter, actually. But just I knock most. I hope it survives in a good way, because I think when it's working, it plays a critical role, right, of dissemination of information.
And Carlos, there's I want to stay with the positives here. There's some really potentially good news coming out of the medical research space. We've talked a lot about on this show some of the issues with AI and and bias and things like that. It seems that there's some developments around machine learning being used to help medical research. Came out in Mass General this week.
It's a very interesting article, and good news, bad news. The bad news was it highlighted how when researchers, when COVID first hit, and the first wave, like 100+ models were developed to help researchers with COVID, developing a vaccine, right? Well, the models failed. Not one of them was useful, so they had to kind of go back to the drawing board. And how do you think about AI in medical research? And what they've come up with is this idea of sort of synthetic data, right? Digital twins that you can create. Start the idea of 2 scans of lungs, or I think it was, and the researchers had created one that was so accurate, it was synthetic. It wasn't a real person, but it had all the features of a real human being. If this were to be developed and come to fruition, it is a game changer, because the ability to test drugs, how they react on people, to look at scans, to train AI. If this approach, which is a different approach, born, I think, out of the first wave of failures with COVID, AI used for use in COVID, if it were to do that, then it becomes a real issue. My wife's a researcher at NIH, and I know the work that it goes. You can spend 2 years trying to answer a question, right, or more. And if AI suddenly takes that and cuts it in half, or in some way accelerates the process of being right or wrong, then that's a very powerful thing. It's more powerful, I think, that in the first generation of ideas, where suddenly you have these AI doctors, right, which just hasn't materialized what you see. But if you have actually AI patients, is really what it comes down to, right? The AI doctor approach hasn't worked that well. However, if you can use AI to make patients and allow that to be an accelerated process, then suddenly the impact is really there. It's not what people thought in the beginning, right? But as the article lays out very thoroughly, that this is a promising area of research, and then the progress that's being made is moving quickly, which is good news for everybody.
So we may need a new Turing test, right? If doctors can't tell the difference between real human brain scans and AI generated ones, then we've definitely hit a milestone, right?
Yeah, it's remarkable, right? The idea that you could put, again, thinking about my wife's work, it's neuroimaging research, and so it's very, very difficult to test things in the human brain because of something called the blood-brain barrier, which makes it hard, as it should be, right, for chemicals to enter the brain. If suddenly you can have a synthetic brain, and you can use it to sort of, again, right, look for ligands, look for markers, a process that takes months, if not years today, and that's accelerated down to, right, a third of the time, because it's all being done on artificial brains, right, that mimic how human brains work, then that is a huge boon to researchers. We're hoping that the teams that are working on this actually are able to do it. It would be a massive change in medical research. It doesn't get out of the press, right? The idea of AI doctors does, but it could have way more profound implications from what you read.
Well, and I like the angle of digital twins, or we talked about deep fakes a couple weeks ago. This is kind of like deep fakes for good, right?
Well, even just inventing new protocols. One of the things the article talked about, how is the doctors naturally, right, are conservative too. They don't want to change a protocol until they know that it's right. As you think about medical devices, right, new surgical procedures, and you say, if I'm able to test them, right, in these digital twins, and I can do that 4 or 5 times faster than I can on real people, then again, the impact of that would be just remarkable. I know people who are surgeons that have the same worries, right? They're very careful about testing things, again, rightly so. If you now have a digital patient that you can operate on, right, heal, hurt again, reheal until you get it right, and that really is a transformational technology. Maybe one of the most promising things I've read about AI, and I read about AI all the time, like you, and that phenomenal report, I thought, was one of the most positive applications of AI I've heard about in the last maybe 2 years.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Amazing.
Yeah. So wish them well, right, for all our sake.
All right, so I don't have to feel bad about only talking about the negatives of tech. I feel like
Thanksgiving Day tomorrow, so it's good stories.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to. That's a good segue to our main topic, which is I wanted to have this conversation with you about kind of monopolies versus conglomerates. There's a lot of press, and a lot of it is, I think, political, but some of the press around organizations or politicians and groups of people going after the Amazons of the world and things. And so there was this article in our DEI Weekly this past week talking about India. So imagine if everything in your home came from just one company. Or from, what's that?
It's Reliance, right? It was a great story about Reliance.
Reliance, yeah. So basically, it's a conglomerate, right? It's a single person who owns a conglomerate that owns basically everything in India. It seems like they're in the food space, they're in the clothing space, they're in the fuel space, the internet space. So it's all part of this array of companies controlled or partnered with Mukesh Ambani. He's one of India's richest men, according to Forbes magazine, net worth of 91 billion, top 10 billionaires list last 3 years. And they were originally in the textile business and the petrochemical business. And through acquisitions and partnerships, they're in retail, telecom, media, much more. So they're saying in this piece basically that if you're in a house in India, you could actually have every product in your home, or every category in your home could be actually provided by this company. And then you look at maybe what I think Elon Musk wants to do with Twitter, a WeChat kind of situation, or you have just the Amazon, who's seemingly up until maybe the last week where they pulling back on a couple of businesses, but seemingly in every business. And you say, wait, why is it okay there? Why are we stopping it here in the crown jewel of capitalism in the U.S.?
Well, it comes down to this word monopoly, right? We've had a long going back, I think, to the era, kind of quote unquote, the rubber barons, right? And that sense that as a society, we don't want one company to accumulate the power to dictate how a market works. But the reality is that this exists, right? I have a friend who works for a company. It's a chemical company, right? And we were just chatting over the weekend. He was telling me that they have products that have 85% market share.
Yeah.
90% market share. I mean, which means basically everybody who buys this thing, just about, right, buys it from them. And I think so these things really do exist. I mean, they're de facto monopolies, right? They're just buried in the value chain of other products. What we see ourselves are things like Amazon, like you said, right? And that's what one of the articles was about, which is this idea of, is Amazon too big, right? Is it the way it does pricing, the way it controls selection, the way all merchants have to sort of run through Amazon? Is it effectively, right, monopolizing or price controlling, or price fixing, right, which is illegal? And but it comes back to this issue of, are you hurting consumers? This is, again, I'm not a monopoly lawyer, so I'm not an expert in this space, but what I know about it seems to come down to, you have to go to a court and demonstrate harm in order to have the court kind of act on Amazon. Somebody have to prove that you and I are hurt by the way Amazon does business. And I don't think they're going to do that. And I think the average person doesn't think that either.
I just think it's a problem, and I don't want to get political, but I think it's a problem with groups of people in the U.S. that are, increasingly anti-business. I mean, what Amazon, and I'm a big defender of Amazon. I'm a customer of Amazon. I don't work for Amazon or have any contracts with Amazon or have any friends or family that work there. But I'm just, I'm amazed at what they've done. I don't understand the fixation, and I am in the tech space, so maybe I'm defensive of the tech space. But I'm just amazed at the fascination and the focus of attacks, particularly on the tech space. So I pulled some stats, Carlos, which I thought were interesting to your point about market share. So apparently, corporate concentration has reached a level today that hasn't been seen since the Great Depression. And if you go down the list, right, Here's a couple nuggets, right? Walmart accounts for $1 in $4 that Americans spend on groceries. They have half the grocery sales in 43 major metropolitan areas. 4 banks control more than $7 trillion in assets. So 41% of assets in the U.S. banking system controlled by 4 companies. There's 4 major meatpacking corporations that control 85% of beef processing. There's 2 telecom companies that dominate internet access. Where there was 50 companies that controlled the media 30 years ago, there's essentially 6 now. There's 2 TV operators that own 80% of the market. One owns 40%. And over 200 television stations. And then you get into just some of the iconic American brands. Coke owns 46% of the soda market. They've got more than 200 brands. Between them and Pepsi, they own actually 72% of the beverage market. So with companies like, you have General Mills owns 100 brands. P&G owns 65. Nestle has 2,000 brands in 12 categories. And the biggest one that I saw was Coke. Coke having 46% of the soda market. Amazon has 38% of the retail market. Mm-hmm. So why the fixation?
I think that there's always this suspicion of big companies, right? Because the way classic economic theory tells you that exactly what you describe is going to happen, because competition. It's the big shark eats the smaller shark. Eventually, you wind up with 2 or 3 sharks who can't eat each other, and they find kind of this equilibrium in an oligopoly, which is what you're talking about, where 2 or 3 companies control the market, right? That's just the natural evolution of this. And so because people know this is what happens sooner or later, and like to your point, that eventually when you get to the oligopoly, the temptation to sort of set prices, control the market with a wink and a nod, kind of know what the other person is going to do, and sort of manipulate that market in a way, which is, for example, I think what the airlines do in many cases, right? That's what people are always going to worry about. So, and I think also because Amazon in particular, it isn't about the numbers. I think it's because it's the reach, the ubiquity of it, right? I think people feel like I don't have any choice. And also they've seen retailers that used to be there disappear, right? So they saw something go away. And I think it's just the fact that Amazon seems to touch everyone's life. So it generates a very emotional reaction.
Right? I think it's a bunch of different things. And you're right. One of the arguments in the I think it was the California monopoly lawsuit that started a couple of years ago. I don't know if it's still going, but a couple of years ago against Amazon was that in the last 10 years, there's been 65,000 small independent retailers that have closed.
Right.
But you gotta, part of that is evolution, right? And part of that is, you have this confluence or this convergence of the way the marketplace is changing naturally, evolving, technology emergence. You throw COVID at the situation where nobody wants to go to a store. But the reality was Main Street was struggling way before Amazon. I mean, maybe that was part of the acceleration of Amazon, but supply chain issues and this corporate consolidation was happening anyway. I mean, if you even go back to one of the most popular monopolies of all time, in Standard Oil. I mean, Rockefeller and Standard Oil had 90% of the industry. And the justification, according to some of the research I did, was that, they had to, it was such a rare thing that they were doing at that time that no other company could really invest the amount of, money and at that time, innovation to do what they needed to do. So it was fundamental to, at least that was the argument, to society at that point, that, they did this. So they allowed them to do that. Not only did they have 90% of the oil market, but the waste that came from oil production launched other businesses for them. Vaseline, for example, was a new product that came from that. They were in that business as well. So, you haven't seen anything like this since the 80s when the government broke up AT&T. And it makes me wonder, why should a company like Amazon invest, in innovation if they're just going to get this kind of this heat?
Well, I don't think anyone's going to do anything to Amazon. The big difference between the Standard Oil days is there was a popular groundswell against these big companies, right? The average quote unquote person didn't like them in many ways. I don't think it's the case with Amazon. Look at Apple, right, with the cell phone market. The same thing. I think that the average consumer likes Amazon, finds it convenient. If you told them, okay, you're paying an extra dollar or two here and there, I don't think most people would care. I think they long ago made, Bezos was at one point the richest person in the world because people decided that the convenience that they brought to people's lives outweighed whatever else is going on inside that company. It was just a simple calculation, right? Just same thing with Google search. What's the search market that Google has, right? With the percentage. I mean, it's got to be in the 80s, I would imagine. And so same thing there. No one's complaining that there aren't 12 search engines, right, Dan?
Well, that's exactly it. If you want to attack somebody in tech, right? And I'm not a big proponent of this, but they went after Facebook, right? Because Facebook had, the FTC sued Facebook in 2021 because they had Facebook Messenger, they had WhatsApp, Instagram. So they own 4 of the 5 major platforms. And the lawsuit said basically 80% of social media at that point was controlled, by Facebook. But look at Google. I mean, Google has the data, the search. I don't know the percentages. I don't have them, but I mean, I can't think of another search engine. I don't know if I can name another search engine. I know Yahoo still has news, that I get. And there's a couple other supposedly more private search
Microsoft Bing is up there, right? DuckDuckGo, if you're a privacy person, right? Wolf Camera. So they're out there. They're niche products basically. But again, it goes back to the history of anti-monopoly, right? Actions. I think a lot of it ties to the general sentiment in American society vis-a-vis a company, and oftentimes vis-a-vis a company's CEO, right? And it doesn't surprise me. Maybe that's why Bezos came out and said, "Hey, I'm going to give all my money away or most of it," and that might be in some way, right, a gesture that says, "Look, I get it. We've been phenomenally successful," and with that one act, I think it takes a lot of pressure off the company if they know, well, all this wealth is actually going to be returned to the society through philanthropy in some way.
Yeah, but but here's my other point. So I saw that article too. I wanted to mention that as well, right? So for all the people watching this that say, "Oh wow, Dan's a extreme right conservative," here's the other side of that. Instead of going after them for antitrust and for being successful at what they're doing and making the investments and innovating, why don't you just raise their taxes? Why don't you just make them pay more taxes, right?
That's the Buffett argument, right? Leave
Right?
the company alone and tax the wealth. And he's the first one who says, I don't pay enough taxes, right? And that's really the issue. You've got people who make $100-200 million, who the famous Romney case, right, where the whatever his income was, and he paid like $15,000 worth of taxes. That's what's crazy about this system, that it's geared towards taking income, right, but not taxing wealth or capital gains. That's what's unfair. If you were lucky enough that you have a trust fund and it's capital gains that pays you a phenomenal amount of money every year, how is that somehow not income if it's what you live on, right? So that's the inequalities in how taxation works in this country, right? And the 5 million loopholes that certain industries have developed. That's really what the problem is. I agree with you. I think you leave Amazon alone. They're succeeding because they do a phenomenal job. And they built an amazing platform, which anybody else could have built if they had the idea and they'd worked as hard as.
That's right. And nobody did.
Nobody.
And by the way, where would we be right now in a post-pandemic era without Amazon?
And by the way, to me, it's one thing if you say, "Oh, this is a monopoly that was built by the people who control the industry." That's not what Bezos did, right? He didn't have any legacy history to work on.
Right. He didn't inherit anything. Right?
He didn't inherit anything, right? This is a company that saw and I had an idea, created out of thin air, and then everybody after they lose, right, the game wants to complain about Amazon. They did what they're supposed to do. The same thing with Google and everybody else, right? Apple as well. It wasn't like they were writing 100 years of monopolistic behavior or regulatory protection. They didn't pay off the government to build Amazon, right? It was built through hard work and innovation. So yeah, if you're going to do something, fine. If you feel like these people are making too much money, then fantastic, right? Figure it out in the tax code, close the loopholes. But I agree with you in that sense that Amazon has done up to now, as far as I know, nothing that would merit somebody saying, oh, this is harming the economy. In fact, I always say there are a couple companies, Amazon being one of them, Google is another, that you can't beat them right anymore. It's going to take regulatory action.
Well, that's the pushback, right? Is that
Right.
you can't beat them. But I disagree with that. I mean, part of the part of the appeal is that part of the criticism is that Amazon has gotten into so many different categories. But the reality is they're a market leader, but they're not a ridiculous market percentage in their biggest category. We talked about retail. In some of the other industries that they're in, they're not. But what they are doing is they're developing innovations, which I think companies should be doing anyway, that span multiple industry verticals, right? So some people look at Amazon not as a retailer but as a tech company, right? Some people look at it not as a tech company but as a logistics company. And something really interesting happened over the last couple of years. If people haven't noticed it, the post office delivers on Sundays now. Why do they do that? Competition. Amazon has hired them and is also competing with them to deliver packages. So while the government's saying, hey, let's shut down Amazon, they're actually improving or pushing the postal service to actually create a better service.
And look, I think that what Amazon has done, and they continue to tend to push the logistical part, is remarkable. I spent most of my consulting career in supply chain consulting, and the idea that you're going to order a product and it's going to be in your house 3 hours later, right? That was unthinkable a decade ago, and yet they've created it. So they don't get enough credit, I think, for the logistical innovation, how they've radically changed customer expectations, right? In so many different ways. They deserve the success they have. I think. Question is, right, is it gotten to the point where no one can compete with them? You argue no, right? It's not. And so, and I think that's the problem anybody's going to have. You could look at Walmart, to your point, right? And somebody come along tomorrow and invent a different thing, and there you go. We could have said
people can compete with them.
Right? A couple of years ago, TikTok wasn't on the radar map, and suddenly it becomes the dominant social media platform. Okay, is it possible somebody invents a new Google tomorrow, a new search? Sure, why not? It's not like it can't happen, right?
You said it last week. You said Apple's, they're also a market leader, so maybe not a perfect example, but they're carving out their own niche around privacy, right? Yeah. So why can't you? DuckDuckGo is a browser, like you said, that's focused on privacy. So I don't think that other people can't compete because of unfairness or monopoly, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. I think they can't compete because they're not willing to do the things that Amazon has done. They're not willing to basically take anything back. I mean, I returned a used, wet, dirty kayak, right? Right. And you could argue whether that's right or wrong, but the point is they did it. So as a consumer, I like that better. I like the no questions asked return policy. I like the fact that every time I order something from somebody else and it's painful, I'm willing to pay more. That one of the lawsuit in California is talking about price competition and things like that. But the part that people are missing is that they created the marketplace and the practices and the logistics and the supply chain to allow these people to. So you don't want to sell on their platform? Go build your own website. Go build your own marketplace and see if you can compete. I think people aren't able to compete because A, they're not investing in technology, and B, they don't really want to change. It's sad that a lot of these small businesses have left, but that's just evolution. That was happening with or without Amazon. But I'd like to be able to get my batteries for my flashlight today because there's a storm coming tomorrow. I think that's a good thing.
The other thing I'll say about that article, which I found the most interesting line, was the argument from Amazon that we actually provide services to you at no cost. For example, price shopping comparison, right? They know there are people who don't buy on Amazon, but use Amazon to do price comparison. So some people will say, look, this is a free service, right? Amazon creates this market. You look at prices and then you decide whether the local price you have is better or not. And people will decide to buy locally if they feel like, oh, this price is as good as or a little bit better than what Amazon does, right? That's a service that Amazon is providing that they don't charge you for unless you're a Prime member, I suppose. But yeah, you're right. I think that what they've done is just simply out innovate the competition. And look, the other thing is this, right? The competition has had a decade to figure something out. And if they haven't, then they haven't, right? They keep moving the bar on everybody. And I think this is going to continue. I just think it's a phenomenally well-run company.
Yeah. And to your point, they've even invested in that, right? There's a tool, there's a barcode scanner where you can go into Walmart and scan a barcode and see if it's cheaper on Amazon or not. So they've literally invested in that also. Your local hardware store didn't do that, right? So yeah, I just think I think it's an attack on tech. I think it's just people that are afraid or hesitant, to see the just the natural evolution of the market and of technology. And I think we should be, as much as I think we should be taxing them more, I think we should be
Look, it's a good
pushing
thing.
innovation, right?
It's a good thing that there's a segment of society that's skeptical about big business, because big business has a history of doing some very bad things. So, okay, fine, that's their role. Let them prove the case. Yeah. Right? Prove the case. I just think that they're going to have a very hard time with respect to Amazon, because of the fact that I think if it is doing some things that are wrong or harming the consumer, I think for the average person would feel that they do much more for them than against them on a daily basis. So good luck with that one. Mm-hmm.
Carlos, great conversation as always, my friend. And if you're watching and you need help, or you just want to get on our case and debate with us, we're happy to chat. We have a network of over 130,000 executives worldwide, including subject matter experts and academic leaders. So let us know what you're working on. Check us out at DEInetwork.com and DEIresearch.com. Otherwise, we'll see you next Wednesday. In the meantime, anybody in the U.S., happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family, Dan. Have a great day.
You too, Carlos. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.